You're triggered. It says an external situation or internal thought arises, acting as a trigger for an emotional response. This could be positive or negative. So the first step is examining triggers. So on a sheet of paper, well, the worksheet will have you do this. I want you to write down all the triggers, the people that trigger you, the places that trigger you, and the perspectives that trigger you. The people that trigger you, the places that trigger you, and the perspectives that trigger you. What I mean by perspective, I mean the thoughts that you have. It's talked about thoughts. Like there's certain perspectives, certain thoughts that are outdated and haven't been updated. They're poor perspectives that when you start thinking about yourself, you're triggered emotionally. When you're by yourself at 9 o'clock. So these emotional triggers don't always have to be about somebody else. It's about you and you. For some of us, we are our emotional triggers. It's that at 9:30 at night, that 11 o'clock hour, that 2 o'clock hour, for some that 3 o'clock hour, when you're left with your thoughts. That's why people like to stay busy. They like to stay around people because they don't want to be left alone with their thoughts because they haven't been trained on how to handle their thoughts. We'll talk about that in another video. But the first thing that you have to begin to process, the first step is examining the triggering event. It says it could be an external situation or internal thought that arises, acting as a trigger for an emotional response. This could be positive or negative. So we also got to think about the positive triggers. We're talking about the negative positive ones. We're talking about you super happy, you too happy. Or in other words, you too thirsty. So that guy walks in, you got these elated feelings, and they feel positive, but they come from a negative place. They come from an insecurity. They come from an impulsive place. They come from deep, dark, black emotions that haven't been dealt with, that are spewing out of wounds, fatherlessness, motherlessness, abuse, neglect, abandonment, and it's causing this grasping emotion that grabs someone and makes them the one that they deem as the emotional trigger. See, God has to be our trigger emotionally. The only triggers that I have, and this is just real, is God, my family, and my purpose. Those should be your triggers. We're talking about things that trigger you to get up out of bed and work on that book. Things that trigger you to get you off of that couch watching LeBron and start watching your family. Like, we're talking about triggers. Like, God should be a trigger. Like every day, every time you look up, you're triggered to give God worship. You triggered to give God praise. You triggered because your perspective has been properly installed. Your family triggers you to be there for them and go to the gym and do what you got to do to make sure you're in their life through and through for a long period of time. See, God, family, and your purpose should be your only triggers. That don't mean you don't have other triggers. We're talking about dominant triggers that will trigger you out of triggers. That'll trigger you out of triggers. What I mean by that, like when you're in a triggering situation negatively and you're in an event or a situation that's triggering you, then the goodness of God will trigger you out of that trigger. For me, if I'm in a situation with a guy and it gets pretty intense, I won't even let it get intense because my family triggered me already. Get home. It triggered me out of the potential trigger. And so when you begin to install God, yourself, purpose, and family as positive triggers, then they can be used to trigger you out of triggers. This is a good word, man. So not all things that trigger positive emotions. See, emotions have no distinction. Like they have distinction as far as what kind of emotion is, but they have no respective place. What I mean by that is this. They can be triggered by anything. I mean, food can trigger certain excitements. And there's nothing wrong with being triggered by those different things. Oh, when your favorite cake comes by, you triggered by it. We're talking about how strong the trigger is. See, there's light triggers, mild triggers. I mean, hold on. There's soft triggers, mild triggers, severe triggers. Soft triggers, man. Listen, I mean, do I get triggered when I walk by certain cakes? Do I get triggered a little soft trigger when I pass by Bojangles? Yeah, but it ain't a strong trigger like it used to be. Mild triggers can just be like competitiveness and whatever, and you got to be cautious with that. But there's also severe triggers. We're talking about mild to severe triggers. You got to examine, okay, man, do I have a strong trigger from God, family, and purpose that can neutralize those mild and severe triggers as I'm growing. I'm not expecting none of us to overcome these things overnight, but these are just things to keep in your mind day and night, meditating on it so that you can be better in these environments. Number two,